Good Monday morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. Today we'll be continuing our study in the book of Titus, looking at Titus chapter 1, verse 15 through chapter 2, verse number 1. To the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But even their mind and conscience are defiled. They profess to know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable, disobedient, and disqualified for every good work. But as for you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine. Recall back in our previous section of studies, we saw Titus's twofold mission. Number one, to set an order and to appoint elders. And then with this, Paul went immediately into the qualities of such elders, where we see the vision of what this bishop, pastor, elder would be doing. And most recently, we looked at this idea of the elder and the anti-elder. That is the person who the elders are exactly equipped to try and stop, whose mouths must be put to shame, and Titus will be a part of that as well. In this passage, Paul is going to continue to describe the sort of behavior that goes on in these teachers and give Titus the instruction he needs as he moves forward in his ministry. Notice what he says here. We see this word twice. To the pure, all things are pure. To the pure, all things are pure. This maxim or axiom, we might say, says that when we have a pure heart, we see the world through pure eyes. And purity here refers to one's motives. Often with this word of purity, we think about a sexual purity or chastity. But more generally, it means we don't look at other people, things, and situations as objects for our own personal indulgence. And of course, that can refer to sexual purity as well. Whenever we look at someone as an object for our personal indulgence, we're not thinking pure thoughts towards them. We don't see sexuality as something to be expressed in marriage. Instead, we see it as something to be taken for our own personal benefit. And this attitude is more broad. We might talk about someone who doesn't have pure intentions. And I believe that's the thing this is talking about, is for people who are pure, everything they run into, they interpret it with a pure lens, a desire that sees other people's benefits, and they don't try to co-opt a situation for their own selves. Last time we saw about these anti-elders, as we call them, that they are gluttonous. That is, they have no self-control. The only thing they know to do is to take, is to receive, to take and take and take. Notice here he says to the pure, all things are pure, but we have this contrast word, which we find really important, this but. But to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is, here's that word again, pure. To the defiled and unbelieving, nothing, in fact, is pure. He even goes on to say how deep this is, and this but here doesn't mean a contrast. I guess it supposes contrast with pure, but specifically means even more so, or continuing on, even their mind and their consciences are defiled. Instead of purity of heart, what is pure to them? Nothing is pure. There's not a thing that is pure to them. They have a lens, a frame of reference, a perspective, a framework, a worldview that looks out and says, hey, what can I get from me? They have this attitude of take and take and take and get and get and get. Now, we look at a person like this that's contrasted with a pure person, that they're defiled and unbelieving, defilement obviously being contrasted with pure. They're against God. Even their mind and their conscience are defiled. Instead of this purity, there is defilement within them and their attitudes. We say that's a pretty wicked and evil person. They're always taking, they're selfish, they're defiled, they're imbibing upon their own lusts, and it seems that, hey, that's a pretty bad person. It seems like it should be obvious, but he says something here that's really important. And this next statement should give us a lot of pause as we consider ourselves. It says that they profess to know God. They profess to know God, but in works they deny him. In works they deny him. This attitude of impurity is not just something that can occur in those who are vocal opponents. We looked last time about how these people have mouths that must be stopped, and they talk about things and they're railing. It seems like they're vocal opponents, but this can occur, this sort of defilement, this sort of impurity of heart and action and motive can occur in people who pledge their verbal support. It could be those who profess and say, hey, I know God, but their works, they deny him. So just denying Christ is enough to say that someone's in this category. It's something that is experientially We might write this off as someone who's a convert, but a convert, but they're covertly going out to try and undermine the faith. But speaking experientially, there have been times that I've professed to know God, but in works I've denied him. It's a heart that can creep into each and every one of us. I was living in a way that was inconsistent with those views that I attested to and I confessed that I believed. And so we need to make sure that we examine ourselves to make sure that this attitude of being defiled and unbelieving doesn't take root in us, that we say we know God, but in fact we are denying him. We need to make sure that our conduct matches our professions. And he goes on to just continue to drive at how bad this is. What are they? They are abominable, they are disobedient, and they are disqualified. Abominable, disobedient, and disqualified for every good work. If we fall into this category where we profess to know God, but in works we deny him, it's not just a little bit bad. It's not sorta not so great or below average. We are opposed to God. An attitude of impurity is completely out of line with the holiness that God is calling us to. In particular, we want to focus on this last word because we may say abominable and disobedient. Those are really bad things, but really I want to note to you that in the context of this book, this last one, disqualified for every good work, is an even graver charge because good works are the major theme of this book. In many ways, getting the saints to where they can participate in good works is the target, the win of this letter, we might say. And by win, I mean it would be a victory if it happened. We should listen, because if we allow this attitude to dwell in us, we're going to be completely out of line. We'll be disqualified, reprobate, unfit for any good work, for anything that God calls us to do. In particular, an attitude of impurity will look for how it can exploit things for its own benefit. It's only interested in taking, whereas a good work is interested in giving, in sharing with others. And if we have an attitude that says take, we'll never be able to give as good works call us to do. And so that brings us to this passage, which comes into chapter 2, verse number 1, which gives us another contrast with this word but. So in contrast to these being abominable, disobedient for every good works, professing to know God, Timothy is supposed to behave in a different way. Timothy is not supposed to speak these things, but he's supposed to speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine. The things which are proper for sound doctrine. Those are the things that Timothy needs to speak, to declare, to announce, to preach, to teach. This word sound is kind of a strange word. We don't use it very often. Essentially, it means healthy, functioning, complete. We might use the word mature in this way. The doctrines that lead people to maturity and health. Doctrine refers to teaching, to facts, to propositions. But in order to have a healthiness, a soundness, we have to have this doctrine. These good works and the sound doctrine, once again, as we saw earlier, they go hand in hand with each other. If we want to have the right deeds, we have to have the right thoughts behind them. So if we want to be about like the people that we read about next on the list and less like the people we read about today, then we need to seek to understand the Word of God. We cannot tire of teaching, because teaching and sound doctrine is the primary antidote for ungodliness. And so today, as we think about this passage, we we definitely see two distinct differences. We see a pure heart, and we see those who are defiled, and those who are abominable and disobedient. And we need to make sure and test our hearts that we don't allow ourselves to fall into this trap in the middle that describes them if they profess to know God, but in works they deny him. And so we need to ask ourselves, what types of works are we doing? Are we laying hold on sound doctrine, or are we always filling ourselves with things that lead to no profit? Thank you for joining us today on Begin in the Word. It's our prayer that just as you begun today in the Word of God, you'll live out today in the Word of God.